A baseball bat was thrust into his hand the moment his eyes blinked open. Spike, a kid with bleached blonde hair buzzing with nervous energy, leaned in close, his face a mask of conspiratorial excitement. He informed Jax that their target, Caleb, was in the boys' lavatory and that now was the time to make a move. Caleb? Jax? A torrent of memories, none of them his own, flooded his mind, and his composure shattered. Just yesterday, his younger cousin had shown up with a cheesy romance novel, insisting he read it because the protagonist shared his name. He'd skimmed it, annoyed, but had noted that the villain was a particularly one-dimensional moron. The kind of character who couldn't win the girl's affection if he had 10 lifetimes to try. And now, impossibly, he had become that very same shallow antagonist, Jax Taylor. Before he could process the sheer absurdity of his situation, a shove from behind sent him stumbling forward. The restroom door crashed open. Inside, a lean young man stood calmly, dressed in a faded t-shirt and jeans that had seen better days. Yet, on his sharply defined features, the worn clothes looked intentional, almost fashionable. He showed no sign of fear or embarrassment at being cornered. His dark eyes were so deep, they seemed to absorb the faint light of the grimy room, pulling Jax's very soul into their depths. A simple glance from him sent a shiver down Jax's spine, raising goosebumps on his arms. He recognized this scene. This was it. The moment in the novel where the antagonist, Jax, corners the brilliant protagonist, Caleb, and breaks his right hand. The injury causes Caleb, a top student, to miss his scholarship exams. He drops out, his life spirals, and he harbors a deep-seated resentment for the boy who ruined his future. Years later, Caleb becomes a powerful figure, and his first act of business is to systematically destroy Jax's family, leaving Jax a homeless beggar who eventually dies, his body never found. Jax looked down at the wooden bat in his hand, clattered to the tiled floor. Spike muttered in confusion, asking why he was hesitating and offering to help. The blonde-haired boy bent to retrieve the bat, ready to step forward himself. A surge of panic shot through Jax. He lunged, grabbing the back of Spike's jacket to pull him back, but his foot landed in a puddle of murky water on the floor. His shoe slipped, and he pitched forward, completely out of control, directly into Caleb's arms. His mouth landed squarely on Caleb's. They were surprisingly soft. No, that was absolutely the wrong thing to be thinking. He tried to scramble back, but a strong arm suddenly wrapped around his waist, holding him fast. His face was drawn back towards Caleb's, their lips about to meet again. Jax wrenched his head to the side at the last second, his cheek pressing against Caleb's. Caleb's voice was a low murmur against his ear, asking if Jax liked him. A choke sound escaped Jax's throat. He mumbled a nonsensical affirmation before he realized what he'd said and quickly tried to deny it. When he finally stopped sputtering, he found Caleb watching him with an inscrutable expression that made his skin crawl all over again. He tried to explain that it was all a huge misunderstanding. Spike's shocked voice cut through the tense silence. Jax turned to see him and the other boys gaping, their eyes wide with disbelief. Jax wanted to tell them it wasn't what it looked like. Spike, however, assured him it was okay, that they could understand and he shouldn't be nervous. Another boy chimed in, saying it all made sense now. Jax's constant bullying of Caleb was just his way of showing affection. They had completely misinterpreted the situation, constructing a whole new narrative on their own. Before Jax could interject, Spike gave him a knowing, ambiguous look, gathered the others, and whispered that they would leave now, so as not to be a third wheel. Jax reached a hand out toward their retreating backs, but it was useless. He and Caleb were alone in the restroom. The embarrassment was suffocating. Seeing that Caleb had no intention of letting him go, Jax struggled out of his grasp. He insisted again that it was a complete misunderstanding and swore he would never bother him again. Then, not daring to meet Caleb's gaze, he turned and fled. He ran all the way to his homeroom, his heart hammering. School was already out for the day, and the classroom was empty. Relying on the novel's memory, he found his locker and grabbed his backpack. As he walked out of the building, he overheard two girls in heavy makeup talking nearby. He paid them no mind until one of them mentioned the heroine's name, Bella. He couldn't help but stop and listen. One girl sneered that after today, that tramp Bella would be nothing but damaged goods, and then they'd see who she could seduce. The other confirmed that the arrangements were made. Bella walked through the same alley every day after school, and Mickey and his crew were waiting for her there. Mickey, Bella, the alley. This was the part of the book where the heroine was nearly assaulted and the hero saved her. But in the original story, Caleb's hand was already broken. His fighting ability was diminished, and he took a brutal beating from Mickey's crew. One of his eyes was struck, causing a detached retina and making his already difficult situation even worse. But now, as Jax, he hadn't broken Caleb's hand. He wondered if that would change the outcome for his eyes. An inexplicable worry gnawed at him, and he quickened his pace. While reading the novel, he had genuinely admired Caleb. Not just for his looks, but for his intelligence, his resourcefulness, and his sheer tenacity. He was the kind of person who could hit rock bottom and still find a way to climb back up. Even as a fictional character, Caleb was truly captivating. The small alley was just to the left of the school's main gate. As soon as Jax stepped into it, he heard Bella's panicked sobs from deeper within, punctuated by the dull thud of fists hitting flesh. A sense of dread washed over him, and he broke into a run. He rounded a corner to see Bella crouched on the ground, weeping. Behind her, Mickey and his friends were scattered on the asphalt, bruised and moaning. Caleb was sitting on the ground, leaning heavily against the brick wall. Panic seized Jax, and he rushed to his side. He asked Caleb if he was all right. Caleb slowly lifted his head, and Jax immediately saw the dark purple bruise blooming at the corner of his left eye. He asked frantically if his eye was hurt, if they had hit him in the eye, and grabbed his hand without thinking. Just then, Bella scrambled to her feet and shoved Jax hard. Caught off guard, he stumbled and fell. She demanded to know what else he wanted, accusing him of having harmed Caleb enough already. Jax was stunned, momentarily forgetting to even get up. With red-rimmed, resentful eyes, Bella told him to stop pretending. She said she knew he had sent these men to force her to submit to him, and that it was a disgusting thing to do. She recounted how, if Caleb hadn't shown up to save her, she didn't know what would have happened. As she spoke, her gaze shifted to Caleb, her expression softening with a shy admiration. Jax realized she was blaming him for the entire incident. He looked at Caleb, desperate not to be misunderstood and targeted for revenge later. He opened his mouth to explain, but a large, well-defined hand appeared in front of his face. It was Caleb's. He was looking at Jax calmly, his chin tilted in a slight, encouraging gesture. Filled with surprise, Jax placed his own hand in Caleb's. With a powerful tug, Caleb pulled him to his feet. Bella protested, questioning why Caleb was being so nice to the person who had bullied him. Jax instinctively tried to pull his hand back, but Caleb's grip was too tight. He couldn't break free. What was happening? Shouldn't Caleb be holding Bella's hand right now? Caleb then said to Jax that they should go, and started to lead him away. Jax was utterly bewildered, his face a canvas of disbelief. He was certain Caleb had grabbed the wrong person. He couldn't just leave Bella there alone, could he? Bella's confused voice called out after them. Caleb's expression was cold, and he didn't slow his pace. Bella began to cry behind them. Jax couldn't help but look back. The sight nearly stopped his heart. Mickey, the thug who had been lying on the ground looking half dead, was now on his feet, rushing toward Caleb with a steel pipe raised high. Bella clearly saw it too, but she did nothing more than wipe at her tears, not even shouting "A." The pipe was about to connect with Caleb's head when Jax reacted, shoving Caleb hard and yelling for him to watch out. The thug, furious at being thwarted, swung the pipe wildly toward Jax instead. Unable to dodge in time, Jax instinctively threw his arms over his head. The expected pain never came. Instead, he heard the thug scream. He looked up to see the man on the ground, the steel pipe now in Caleb's hand. After a few swift kicks, Caleb raised the pipe, ready to bring it down with full force. Jax shouted no, rushing forward to grab Caleb's arm. He pleaded with him to think about his future, about college applications, him not to let this scum ruin everything. Beating up a few thugs was one thing, but killing someone would destroy Caleb's life. Caleb glanced at him, his fingers loosened, and the pipe fell to the ground with a loud clang. Only then did Bella walk over. She pointed an accusing finger at Jax and demanded to know why Caleb had listened to him. She whined that when she had asked him to spare the men earlier, he had called her sick, but now that Jax asked, he complied immediately. Jax finally understood why Caleb had tried to pull him away and had stopped looking at Bella. This girl was incredibly annoying. Caleb took Jax's hand again and looked down at him, a silent question in his eyes. Jax nodded. It felt strange for two guys to hold hands, but Caleb's hand was warm. Bella's shrill voice followed them as they walked away, questioning how Caleb could just leave her, a girl, all alone. This time, neither of them stopped. They flagged down the first taxi they saw. Jax was worried about Caleb's eye and directed the driver to the nearest hospital. At the emergency room, he told Caleb to wait while he rushed to handle the registration. When he returned, breathless, he found Caleb looking at him with a peculiar intensity. He wanted to ask what was wrong, but the moment their eyes met, Caleb's expression became impassive again. Jax told him he'd gotten him an emergency slot and they needed to get his eye checked immediately. Caleb just nodded and took his hand again. By now, Jax was so used to it he didn't even think to pull away. He let Caleb lead him. As they walked, he couldn't help but lecture him, reminding him that with the SATs less than 100 days away, he couldn't afford to be so careless with his health, especially his eyes. He had changed the plot point about his hand, but somehow his eye was still injured. Caleb explained quietly that the woman, Bella, had suddenly rushed over, and the thug had taken advantage of the distraction. Jax glanced at him, noticing the cold, impatient tone in his voice whenever Bella was mentioned. It was so different from the novel, where Caleb was already secretly in love with her at this point. This incident was supposed to be the turning point in their relationship. None of this made any sense. Fortunately, the doctor confirmed Caleb's injury was just a minor contusion. No damage to the eye itself. Still, the doctor sternly advised him to be more careful in the future. Walking out of the clinic, Jax reiterated the doctors, emphasizing how important his eyes were. Caleb looked at him with that same strange expression. Jax reflected for a moment, wondering if he was nagging him like an old woman. His phone rang. The screen displayed Mom. A wave of guilt washed over him as he answered. His mother was worried, asking why he wasn't home yet. He'd completely forgotten that the family driver picked him up from school every day. They must have been waiting. He told her he was on his way home. She insisted on sending the driver to his location. After hanging up, he told Caleb he was waiting for his ride. He assumed Caleb would leave, but instead, he just stood there quietly beside him, showing no intention of going anywhere. Half an hour later, a sleek black car pulled up. Jax urged Caleb to get in so he could drop him off at home first, but Caleb refused. Without another word, he turned and walked away into the darkness. Jax was baffled. He'd been fine just a moment ago. What had just happened? All the way home, he replayed their interactions, wondering what he'd done to offend him. The next day at school, he walked into class to a sea of strange looks. A girl with a high ponytail, Chloe, accosted him, her eyes filled with contempt. She told him he was a disgusting human being for what he'd done to her friend Bella. She said he was lucky Bella was too kind-hearted to call the police. Before Jax could process her words, Bella herself appeared, taking Chloe's arm and telling her to let it go, that making a big deal of it would be bad for everyone. She then shot Jax a look dripping with resentment. He found her Madonna-like act utterly infuriating. He was being blamed for yesterday's events. He was not one to suffer injustice silently and opened his mouth to defend himself, but the school bell rang. The teacher arrived. The students scurried to their seats. Before leaving, Chloe gave him a gloating look and warned him that he was about to get what he deserved. Two people walked in, the head teacher and beside him, Caleb. Jax's eyes were immediately drawn to the bruise near Caleb's eye, which had deepened to a dark purple overnight. Caleb's seat was behind and to the left of his, and as he walked past, it seemed he intentionally angled his head so Jax could see the injury clearly. The teacher announced that before class, she had something serious to discuss. She stated that she had received a report from two students that Jax Taylor had colluded with outsiders to assault Caleb and Bella. Whispers erupted throughout the class. Jax looked at Chloe's smug face and finally understood. One of the accusers was clearly her. The other had to be Bella. He was about to stand up and protest when the teacher's words took a sharp turn. She continued, explaining that shortly after receiving the report, Caleb had come to her office with evidence proving that Jax was not the aggressor. In fact, another party was responsible, and Jax had not only saved Caleb from the attack, but had also taken him to the hospital for his injuries, an act she found commendable. Jax wasn't listening to the teacher or his classmates anymore. He was staring at Caleb. So this was why he'd come in with the teacher. A warmth spread through his chest, an undeniable feeling of gratitude. The teacher then named the two students who had made the false report, Bella and her friend, Chloe. She admonished them for making accusations without knowing the facts. The class erupted in an uproar. No one had expected Bella, who always cultivated an image of a gentle, pitiful victim, to be capable of such deceit. After a few more words of condemnation, the teacher moved on. When the bell finally rang, Bella and Chloe rushed out of the classroom, followed by a wake of curious classmates. Soon, only Jax and Caleb remained. Jax turned in his seat and found Caleb already looking at him. When their eyes met, Jax felt a strange embarrassment, his heart beating a little too fast. He looked away, but the thought of what Caleb had done for him made him stand up. After a moment of awkward hesitation, he walked over to Caleb's desk and managed to thank him. Caleb looked at him coolly, a slight frown on his face, as if to say he was not satisfied. Unsure what to do, Jax tentatively asked if he could treat him to dinner as a proper thank you. Caleb agreed immediately. When Jax returned to his seat, he found his heart was pounding even harder. After school, he slung his backpack over his shoulder and rushed to meet Caleb. He had been looking forward to this all day, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why he was so excited. Maybe he just wanted to solidify his new, positive relationship with Caleb, and alter the grim fate laid out for him in the novel. As they walked out of the classroom, Spike and his friends appeared. Spike excitedly asked Jax if he wanted to go hang out. Jax felt the atmosphere around Caleb suddenly turn colder. He explained that he had already made plans to have dinner with Caleb. As soon as he said it, the tension seemed to dissipate. He glanced at Caleb, who looked perfectly calm. It must have been his imagination. Spike and the others looked profoundly disappointed. Spike started to say something about not abandoning his bros for a new brother, but he caught Caleb's gaze and trailed off. Jax explained that Caleb had helped him and he was just repaying the favor. At that moment, Caleb leaned in and whispered in Jax's ear that he was hungry. That was all the prompting Jax needed. He grabbed Caleb's hand, ignored Spike's protests, and hurried away. Once they were outside, he asked Caleb what he wanted to eat. Caleb replied that he liked whatever Jax liked. Jax felt his face flush. He was blushing. How pathetic. He frantically looked around and spotted a seafood boil restaurant not far away. He pointed and asked if that was okay. Caleb, his eyes fixed on Jax's, gave a small nod. His gaze was so focused, so serious, it could easily be misunderstood. Part of Jax wanted him to stop looking at him like that, but another, deeper part was secretly pleased. Inside, they were led to a counter lined with fresh seafood on ice. Caleb seemed genuinely indifferent to the food, telling Jax to get whatever he wanted. So Jax picked a few of his own favorites and a few things he thought Caleb might like. Back at their table, the waiter soon brought out a steaming bucket of seasoned seafood. The shrimp were fresh from the pot and so hot that Jax yelped, fumbling to peel one. Without a word, Caleb picked one up, and in 2 deft movements had it perfectly peeled. Jax looked on in envy. Then, Caleb placed the peeled shrimp in Jax's bowl. He mumbled that Jax had said he liked shrimp the most and told him to eat. Then he started on a crab leg, the sweetmeat soon appearing in Jax's bowl as well. Jax looked from Caleb to the food in his bowl, unsure how to react. Before this strange life, both his parents had died. He had relatives, but they found him a burden. He was used to a life where no one particularly cared for him. But Caleb, he quietly said thank you, then, trying to suppress a wave of sour emotion, ate the shrimp. Caleb told him to eat slowly, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes, before he went back to peeling more. Jax told him to stop and eat some himself, but Caleb insisted on putting all the peeled seafood in his bowl. So Jax had no choice but to start peeling seafood himself. Once it had cooled slightly, he could manage it. He placed the meat in Caleb's bowl and gave him a hopeful smile. Only then did Caleb pick up his fork. He discovered that Caleb would only eat the seafood that Jax himself had peeled for him. And so, he began the long but satisfying task of peeling seafood for Caleb, while Caleb did the same for him. It felt like they were both taking care of each other. He was thoroughly enjoying the dinner, his body and mind both content. If only it hadn't been for what happened at the end. After they finished, Jax was about to pay when Caleb stood up and said he was going to the restroom. Jax waited at the table. A moment later, a commotion erupted near the front of the restaurant. He looked over and saw Caleb holding Bella, who had her face buried in his chest. A boy and several other girls were standing around them, the girls shouting accusations at Bella while the boy tried to explain. The scene was sickeningly familiar. A memory exploded in his head. He had completely forgotten that this seafood place was the backdrop for Caleb and Bella's love confession in the novel. Bella, out with a classmate, is misunderstood by the classmate's girlfriend, who shows up with friends to publicly shame her. Caleb appears, saves her from the humiliation, and Bella confesses her feelings. Caleb, who already had a crush on her, accepts, and they officially become a couple. Jax looked away, a bitter feeling twisting in his gut. The novel never explained how Caleb ended up at this specific restaurant. Now he knew. He had brought him here. He had inadvertently orchestrated the romantic climax for the story's main couple. It was supposed to be normal for the hero and heroine to get together, so why did his chest feel so tight, as if his heart had been ripped out? He didn't want to watch their beautiful moment unfold. He stood, walked to the front desk, paid the bill, and left without a backward glance. He didn't see Caleb forcefully push Bella away from him. The summer wind was hot, but walking down the street, Jax felt a deep chill. He rubbed the goosebumps on his arms, feeling utterly hollow. He was about to hail a cab when a hand grabbed his from behind. He spun around to see Caleb, his face etched with nervousness and worry. Jax's gaze flickered past him, searching for Bella. Then he felt a strange sense of relief. But he immediately chided himself for his foolishness. They were the main characters. If they weren't together now, they would be eventually. Caleb asked why he had left. Jax forced a casual tone, saying he just wanted to go home. Caleb's grip tightened as he asked if he was angry. Jax laughed it off, asking what he had to be angry about. Caleb couldn't explain it, but he wouldn't let go of his hand. Jax could feel the warmth from his touch, but he told himself that warmth wasn't meant for him. He pulled his hand free just as a taxi pulled up. He jumped in and told the driver to hurry. After the car had gone some distance, he couldn't resist looking back. Caleb was still standing in the same spot, a lonely silhouette against the dark street. And the ache in Jax's chest grew even worse. He returned to school the next day and acted as if nothing had happened. He glanced at Caleb's seat and saw it was empty. He felt a small measure of relief. He had spent most of the night mentally preparing himself to face Caleb, to pretend everything was fine. He waited nervously, but Caleb never showed up. All day he was distracted, worried that something had happened. He watched Bella, thinking that if something were wrong, she, as Caleb's new girlfriend, would surely know. But she seemed completely untroubled. He must have been overthinking it. Caleb was absent the next day, and the day after that. By the fourth day, Jax couldn't stand it anymore. He used his break to go to the teacher's office. The teacher, who had taken a liking to him due to his recent academic improvement, greeted him warmly. He asked her if she wasn't concerned that Caleb hadn't been to class. She gave him a strange look and reminded him that Caleb had been granted early admission to Yale. She had announced the news to the whole class last week. The memory hit him. That was the day he had arrived in this world. The original Jax had heard the news, and his jealousy had boiled over, leading him to corner Caleb in the restroom. The real Caleb's life was supposed to be ruined. He was supposed to have his hand broken, his eye injured, and then be forced to sell his spot at Yale for medical money he so desperately needed. But now he was safe. Walking out of the office, Jax's mind was a blur. Caleb was going to Yale. He didn't have to come back to school. They might never see each other again. The thought was like a needle piercing his heart. Why did he feel this way? Was it just because Caleb was a character he admired? But the feeling of Caleb's hand in his, the way he peeled shrimp for him, that was all real. Caleb was a living, breathing person. As he passed by the school's landscaped garden, he heard familiar voices. He heard Caleb's name and instinctively turned to see Bella and Chloe talking. With no one else around, Bella had dropped her gentle facade. Her face was a mask of irritation as she complained about the other night at the seafood restaurant. She said she had confessed her feelings to Caleb, and he had rejected her without a second thought, even telling her she was sick, right in front of everyone. He had made a complete fool of her. She went on, her voice tight with anger, about how she had thrown herself into his arms and he had pushed her away without an ounce of pity. Jack stopped listening. His mind was replaying that night. He had only seen the initial moment of Bella in Caleb's arms before turning away. He hadn't seen what came after. Caleb had pushed her away. He had rejected her confession. They weren't a couple. The more he thought about it, the more his heart pounded with a wild, exhilarating hope. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to see Caleb. He turned and ran back to the teacher's office to ask for his address.